No alarms and no surprises. But did the Prime Minister's historic visit see the most powerful man in the world at his most presidential yet? Theresa May was the first world leader invited to the White House. She was greeted with warm words.
The special relationship between our two countries has been one of the great forces in history for justice and for peace.
And in a further sign of the importance of that relationship, I have today been able to convey Her Majesty the Queen's hope that President Trump and the First Lady would pay a state visit to the United Kingdom later this year.
They talked trade and Brexit, with the Prime Minister, not President Trump, saying he was committed to NATO. We'll look at what the talks could mean for two countries united by great political change. Plus, what were they really thinking? Analysis of whether their body language contradicts their friendly first meeting. Also on News at 10 tonight, every little helps. Could Tesco merging with Britain's biggest food wholesaler mean they'll dominate corner shops as well as supermarkets? A haulage boss and his mechanic are jailed for the manslaughter of 4 people killed by their badly maintained tipper truck. And stop talking, start feeling. How touch technology could soon take over from voice-activated gadgets in the home.
This is ITV News at 10 with Nina Hussain.
Good evening. It was difficult to know quite what to expect from Donald Trump during his historic first meeting with Theresa May. But in the end, the presence of the Prime Minister at the White House seemed to temper the president. There were no brash, outlandish statements, instead a mild, more measured tone as he talked up the special relationship and talked down the prospect of America torturing terror suspects again. For her part, Theresa May invited him on a state visit to Britain and spoke of close cooperation on defence and security, as well as, of course, a new trade deal.
Look at that, they're helping each other already. Theresa May came to America to forge a renewed special relationship with the country's most unlikely president, and
the special relationship between our two countries has been one of the great forces in history for justice and for peace. And, by the way, my mother was born in Scotland, Stornoway, which is serious Scotland. Today, the United States renews our deep bond with Britain, military, financial, cultural, and political. We have one of the great bonds.
But although Donald Trump was thrilled to get to know our Prime Minister, there's someone else he seemed even more excited to meet.
And in a further sign of the importance of that relationship, I have today been able to convey Her Majesty the Queen's hope that President Trump and the First Lady would pay a state visit to the United Kingdom later this year, and I'm delighted that the President has accepted that invitation.
She also got what she wanted, an apparent reversal of his hostility to NATO, the bulwark of our peace and security.
And today, we've reaffirmed our unshakable commitment to this alliance. Mr. President, I think you confirmed that you're 100% behind NATO.
Not eye to eye on everything, however. Britain believes the time isn't yet right to lift sanctions on Putin's Russia, while he thinks maybe he can be Putin's buddy.
We believe the sanctions should continue until we see that Minsk agreement fully implemented, and we've been continuing to argue that inside the European Union.
As far as, again, Putin and Russia, I don't say good, bad, or indifferent. I don't know the gentleman. I hope we have a fantastic relationship. That's possible, and it's also possible that we won't.
Now, one of the oddest, but perhaps most reassuring moments for Theresa May was how Donald Trump backed away from recent proposals to give America's security services the power to torture terrorist suspects.
We have a great general who has just been appointed Secretary of Defense, General James Mattis, and he has stated publicly that he does not necessarily believe in torture or waterboarding, or however you want to define it. Enhanced interrogation, I guess, would be a word that a lot of people would like to use. I don't necessarily agree, but I would tell you that he will override because I'm giving him that power.
The big prize for Britain as we withdraw from the European Union was supposed to be a trade deal with America. It's early days.
So we are discussing how we can establish a trade negotiation agreement, take forward immediate high-level talks, lay the groundwork for a UK-US trade agreement, and identify the practical steps we can take now in order to enable companies in both countries to trade and do business with one another more easily.
A flamboyant president and an introverted British Prime Minister. What do they really have in common?
And I can tell you that I think we're going to get along very well. You know, it's interesting because I am a people person. I think you are also, Teresa. And I can often tell how I get along with somebody very early, and I believe we're going to have a fantastic relationship.
I think one of the things we have in common is that we want to put the interests of ordinary working people right up there, centre stage. Those people who, they're working all the hours, they're doing their best for their families, and sometimes they just feel the odds are stacked against them.
And it's a great honour to have Winston Churchill back.
Britain's great wartime Prime Minister returned to the Oval Office. Now, Churchill coined the phrase the special relationship for the ties between Britain and America, and he'd probably agree that we witnessed something special today. But where it goes from here, goodness only knows. Robert Peston, News at 10 in Washington.
Well, if today's meeting is anything to go by, the Prime Minister and the President have every intention of cooperating closely on both domestic and international affairs. And with Brexit negotiations imminent and diplomatic issues to address in both Europe and the Middle East, there will be much to cooperate on. So what did we learn today about how the two leaders will position themselves on the world stage?
Their countries are old allies, but are they new friends? We now have the first idea of where this relationship might be special, with NATO an interesting place to start. While troops secure the Russian border in Eastern Europe, Donald Trump's been sounding retreat. Sceptical about NATO's value when some countries won't cough up, has the Prime Minister convinced him to commit.
The fact that he didn't mention NATO in his remarks meant that she felt she better bring it up. Are you 100%? You are 100% behind, aren't you, Mr. President? I didn't hear a reply, but I think he's also trying to hedge, keep his powder dry, not sound like he's going back on too many of his issues.
And where does that leave Russia? With Donald Trump due to phone President Putin tomorrow, did his openness to loosening sanctions fit with her insistence today that they've got to stay?
Donald Trump appears to be the friendliest American president towards Russia that I can remember, and that's very divergent from British views. So Theresa May needs to be careful in her anxiety to be Donald Trump's best friend. She finds herself colluding with views on Russia.
There is softer ground on Brexit. Donald Trump's long had business ties with Britain, like this golf course in Scotland. Today he spoke warmly of Brexit, but gave no detail on any trade deal with America.
I think to some extent there's a little bit of surprise that there wasn't a direct sort of addressing of this prospect of a free trade agreement between both sides, because there's been so much of a build-up in the last couple of days about this being a way to sort of offset any negative fallout from Brexit, sort of economically speaking, in terms of trade.
And that wasn't the only thing left unsaid. Despite promising she wouldn't be afraid to, there was no mention from the Prime Minister, in public at least, of the President's controversial views and the protests they attract.
How disappointing, given the opportunity that our Prime Minister, who has traded for so long on being a woman, ignored the massive shout that went up this weekend from millions of women.
So as Donald Trump travelled to the Pentagon this evening to swear in his new Secretary of Defence, on some issues, it seems, Theresa May could also join his inner circle. Paul Brand, News at 10, Westminster.
Analysis now from Washington with our political editor, Robert Peston, and our Washington correspondent, Robert Moore, at the White House. Robert Peston, to you first. Theresa May's team must be pretty pleased with how today went.
Well, look, Donald Trump, one of the most unconventional, brash and abrasive world leaders any of us have ever seen. It was very high risk, therefore, for Theresa May to be the first world leader to have talks with him. And yes, having talked to her colleagues, they do think it went pretty much as well as it could possibly have gone. He didn't contradict her when she said that he was 100% behind NATO. Admittedly, he didn't reinforce the point, but it's out there. And it's very reassuring for her that he did back away from those controversial plans to give the American security services the power to torture, because that would have really endangered the special relationship, because it would have made it very difficult for our security services to work with America's security services. One slightly odd moment was their holding hands in the colonnade, but that was the worst it got for her. Of course, the real work starts now. She said that they were paving the way for a trade deal, but no detail was given about process or scope of talks. And so, to be clear, we've got the beginnings of a good relationship, but we're going to have to wait some considerable time to see whether he delivers on his promises, whether we get meat on this particular bone.
Robert Peston, thank you to Robert Moore now. President Trump seemed a week on at his most presidential yet today.
Yes, look, it says something about the wild ride we've been on for these last 7 days, that many people in this town are talking about this being a kind of a measured and disciplined performance. Just to take two issues that Robert Peston alluded to there on torture, it appears President Trump still believes it's an effective tool, but he's handing over decision-making to his Secretary of Defense, General James Mattis, and Mattis is on the record as saying he thinks beer and cigarettes are more effective as an interrogation tool than torture. And on Russia, this time was full of rumors that President Trump was poised to lift sanctions on the Kremlin. Now it appears that is on hold, at least for now, until a conversation this weekend between Trump and Putin. So it does appear that we've had a victory of sorts for those like the Prime Minister who were trying to cajole this president into becoming a more conventional figure.
And is this a sign that there's some semblance of normality at the White House now?
Well, no, I think that's premature. Look, this is a presidency that appears to kind of feed off, live off controversy. I mean, just in the last 30 minutes, we've had two new executive orders signed by President Trump, one telling the military to kind of rebuild up their resources and their assets, the other really blocking entry to citizens or refugees from 7 Middle Eastern countries. So, you know, we've often debated whether this presidency is going to be transactional or disruptive. It appears actually it's going to be both. It's going to be transactional when it comes to dealing with an ally like Britain, but it's going to be disruptive on issues like immigration and national security.
Robert Moore, thank you. There's much to dissect from today's meeting between the Prime Minister and the President, and not just in what they said in their press conference. So later in the programme, we'll hear analysis from a body language expert to see if we can tell how the pair really got on. The big merger deal announced by Tesco today certainly went down well in the city. Its share price jumped by nearly 10% on the news. It was joining forces with Britain's biggest food wholesaler, the Booker Group. But it didn't go down so well with the thousands of small independent stores who Booker supply. Many now fear being priced out, victims perhaps of Tesco's desire to stay at the top of the supermarket food chain.
Booker is now top of Tesco's shopping list. The supermarket is planning to pick up Britain's biggest food wholesaler, which also owns a string of retail outlets. But its new plan provokes some old fears from food producers. Some believe Tesco's growing strength could be used to dominate suppliers.
The bigger they are, the more bargaining power they got, and it all comes down to the supplier. It's frightening. It's really bad news for all suppliers, not just farmers, because it doesn't matter what you're producing. If you're producing it for a supermarket, they dictate the price they pay.
So, just how wide-ranging would this new food giant be? First, Booker. It's the UK's largest food wholesaler. It sells to 1.3 million customers, and some of them are Tesco's rivals. And it also owns Budgens, Londis and Premier Store brands. Next, Tesco, we all know as the UK's biggest food retailer, selling across 3,500 stores and with 50 million customer transactions a week. Now, if today's £3.7 billion deal goes through, Booker will merge with Tesco to create a new concentration of commercial power in Britain's food supply chain.
For 9 years, we've paid our dairy farmers more than it costs them to produce our milk.
Tesco's adverts reassure customers it's not using its vast buying power to drive unfair deals from suppliers. But there are also concerns from some of its smallest retail rivals.
Many independent retailers have really seen themselves as competing head-to-head with Tesco. Sometimes they're competing on the same parade with the Tesco Express and their store, and they're now concerned about will Tesco be able to see the promotions that they're running, the margins they're making, and understand more about their business through this deal.
Tesco would gain a substantial new advantage in Britain's increasingly hostile supermarket price wars. But its boss says competitors will benefit too. What do you say to owners of small independent stores who now fear that you, their big rival, will essentially control their wholesale supplier?
The things that we offer in terms of better service are things that can improve those independent retailers' ability to serve their customers.
Combining the biggest food retailer with the biggest food wholesaler would be a game changer. So far, competition authorities have been silent, but Tesco does expect officials to launch a review. Chris Choi, News at 10.
Long prison sentences were handed down today to the boss of a haulage firm and his mechanic, whose failure to fix the rusty brakes on one of their tipper trucks led to 4 people being killed when it ran out of control. The truck's driver had no way of slowing as he headed down a steep country lane. Among those who died was 4-year-old Mitzi Steady, whose family said today they are still trying to process what happened 2 years on.
In Mitzi Steady's home, they missed the love, laughter and singing. It went the day she died, hit by a 32-ton truck in Bath. The scar of the loss, said her mother, is with the family every day.
We are bereft and emotionally distraught to be without our child. I still find it difficult to sleep and accept that Mitzi has died, that I can no longer hold her and protect her, that she had to suffer such a sudden, traumatic, senseless death, and that I was not there with her and cannot be with my beautiful girl now.
Steve Vaughan's widow, Sian, tearfully told the court of the horror of learning of his death. No punishment or word, she said, could compensate for her loss. Phil Allen's family said they were absolutely heartbroken and hoped those responsible would realise the devastation they've caused. Terribly saddened, left with hurt and pain, Robert Parker's wife, Denise, described his death as a pointless waste of life. 4 families brought together by a tragic and preventable crime. Matthew Gordon was the haulage firm owner, concerned for himself, not the public. Sent down for 7.5 years. Peter Wood, his mechanic, complicit in a safety regime that was cavalier, imprisoned for 5 years. As he sentenced the 2 men responsible, the judge said to them, "You knew that being casual about safety risked the lives of others." He said that the failures were inexplicable.
Tragically, this incident and subsequent loss of life, serious injury and long-standing effects on the community were totally foreseeable and also avoidable.
A casual culture towards safety, the consequences of which are measured by lives lost and time spent in prison. Rupert Evelyn, News at 10, Bristol.
Jeremy Corbyn's insistence that all Labour MPs vote in favour of the government's Brexit bill led to another of his shadow ministers resigning today. Jo Stevens, the shadow Wales secretary, said she's quitting because she cannot bring herself to vote in favour of leaving the EU. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan is here. This looks like it's becoming another crisis for Jeremy Corbyn, is it?
Well, it certainly has all the characteristics of a crisis, doesn't it? Jo Stevens, Shadow Wealth Secretary, is the second frontbencher in 2 days to quit because she says she can't, in good conscience, go with Jeremy Corbyn and vote against Brexit. There are 3 more junior frontbenchers who've said they can't vote with Jeremy Corbyn. They may have to be sacked if they don't. There are 2 more shadow cabinet members, Clive Lewis, who says he's not made up his mind yet, depends what the bill looks like, and Rachel Maskell told me today she would have to see what her constituents say. And yet, when I put all of this to a senior Labour figure who would not normally be on Jeremy Corbyn's side, they said, no, this isn't actually a crisis. He will get over this. And I think that's right, because this is not about Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. That's not why people are going. And relations between them and the leadership are being very carefully managed to make sure they don't turn sour. This is really about the Labour movement's split on Brexit. So, a short-term leadership crisis, no, I don't think so. A longer-term electoral problem for Labour, yes, probably.
Carl Dinnan, thank you. If there was a procedure you would hope would never be cancelled by an NHS hospital, it would be an urgent, potentially life-saving operation. Yet figures out today show a record number were postponed in England last year, more than 4,000 of them, largely because of a lack of hospital beds. For the patients and their families, that can have a devastating impact.
Well, you're supposed to do 3 and take the average of 3.
Bruce was diagnosed with cancer last March. After 10 months of chemotherapy and radiotherapy, he needs an operation to remove his tumour before it spreads. Twice since Christmas, that operation has been cancelled, the last time because there was no free bed for him to recover afterwards.
It was devastating to be told that, no, you can't have the operation. And not because the theatre staff weren't available or anything else. It was purely because of a bed.
Figures show that more than 4,000 operations were cancelled last year. That's an increase of 27% in 2 years. It reflects a winter that's posed huge problems for NHS staff, with trusts issuing more than 200 crisis alerts each week and diverting patients from overcrowded emergency wards. And that winter is far from over, with many hospitals struggling to free enough beds to treat every patient. Each of those cancellations has its effect. In the case of this couple, the fear cancer might spread.
I didn't sleep the night before I went home. Yeah, terrible. Yeah, so you know, when you get that far and it's cancelled, you just think, well, time's running out, because there's a time limit from when you have your chemo and your radiotherapy to when you're operated on. It can't be indefinite.
The hospital's chief operating officer has issued a statement saying he sincerely apologises for any distress the cancellation has caused. Val and Bruce Knight say they don't want an apology. They just want to know that when they come back here in 10 days' time, that operation will finally go ahead. Damon Green, News at 10, Coventry.
Next, it would be something of an understatement to say technology has changed our lives in the last decade or so, and such is the pace of change that it takes quite a lot to impress us these days. But the latest way to control appliances in your home, tested out by our science correspondent Alok Jar today, really does look like the kind of trick a magician might pull. Just by waving your hands in what appears to be thin air, you can turn things on and off at will, and even feel objects that aren't really there.
This unassuming device could revolutionise how we interact with the digital world. Each of these circles is a small speaker. Put your hand above it and you can feel objects that aren't there.
So what I'm feeling here are little vibrations on my hand. A little bit strange given that nothing's touching it.
It's called ultra haptics technology, and it'll give you touch feedback as you use gestures to control the world around you. Developed by a team of engineers at Bristol University, they say it could help control your computer, appliances at home, or in your car. Inventor Tom Carter gave me a demonstration.
This is simulating bubbles popping on the underside of my hand. It's a little bit strange. How do people normally react when they first come across this?
Well, I think initially people don't necessarily believe that this kind of thing's possible. So you get a combination of amazement,
sort of the wow sensation, people kind of just staring in disbelief.
I'm closing my eyes, and if you told me there was something there, I'd believe you. It is a real feeling.
As technology becomes increasingly embedded in our daily lives, we'll need simple ways to control it.
In reality, we really used to have a lot of tactile feedback. When you pressed a button, you felt it. When you turned the dial, you felt it. Touchscreens made a big jump away from that, so now you only feel a plane of glass. And when we go to gesture control, you don't feel anything at all.
Why do we need that sense of physicality in touch? What's important about that?
Well, just for a start, your brain processes information through touch 2 times as fast as it does through sight, and faster than it does through audio as well. So it makes it just physically easier to use these kind of devices.
This is how the Ultra Haptics device works. An infrared camera identifies the position of the hand. The speakers focus ultrasound waves precisely to parts of the palm or fingertips. That causes the skin to vibrate, creating the feeling that you're touching virtual objects, like buttons or dials, in mid-air. The technology can be programmed to create the feeling of any three-dimensional object, useful for virtual reality.
So in this experience, you can just reach out, just like the real world, and you get a whole level of different information from your sense of touch that you don't experience from your eyes or your hearing.
Ultra Haptics won't appear in your devices tomorrow, but when it does, whether it's this technology or something like it, it'll give us a whole new dimension to our interaction with the digital world. Alok Jha, News at 10.
As if 16 consecutive national television awards weren't enough, the presenting duo of Ant and Dec got their hands on another prize today, an OBE presented by Prince Charles at Buckingham Palace.
Mr. Declan Donnelly for services to broadcasting and to entertainment.
In a slight change to tradition, Dec went up before Ant to pick up the award as the pair were recognised for services to entertainment.
It's mad.
I mean, look, the whole week's just a bit crazy, if I'm honest with you. So, and it's back to work tomorrow on Britain's Got Talent, so we've got no time to kind of sit and enjoy. Apart from today.
We are going to take these to show Simon Cowell, because I don't think he's got one.
Oh, he hasn't, has he?
No, so we're going to take these, just to rub his nose in it a little bit.
Look at that, Cowell.
And you can watch more of that interview at itv.com/news. And finally, we end tonight where we began, with a look at the new special relationship between the President of the United States and Prime Minister May. But this time we'll take a closer look. Neither side is likely to tell the world's press how they really feel about each other. So we brought in a body language expert to examine if the warm words between them belie a much more complex pairing.
Theresa May said sometimes opposites attract, and these two leaders' lives could not be more different. The Prime Minister, daughter of a vicar, the President, son of a New York real estate developer. She worked in finance before becoming an MP. As a businessman, he was making his billions. Mrs May likes the quiet life at home in Berkshire. Mr Trump calls home a gold leaf decorated apartment in his own Manhattan tower. Unsurprisingly, at the White House, it was the President who took control.
He's making an effort to touch it. Yes,
there
it
we are.
is. And it's a slightly patronising touch on the shoulder, just to say, you're in my house.
This looks a tiny bit awkward, that handshake.
That looked as if he was almost trying to grab her to do a courtly kiss, but changed his mind, fortunately, at the last second.
Both were more comfortable taking questions. The President, not known for self-deprecation, even made a joke.
Actually, I'm not as brash as you might think. And I can tell you that I think we're going to get along very well, you know.
What do you make from that little interaction between the two?
Genuine warmth, a sort of hint of someone that not only has got perhaps a sense of humour, but occasionally a sense of humour against himself. And actually, he hasn't shown that very often so
he
far.
must feel quite comfortable with the Prime Minister to bring that out.
Hugely so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
At the end of a short press conference with no embarrassing moments, the Prime Minister and President returned to private talks. What to make then of their time in front of the cameras?
They actually smiled at each other. They interacted with each other with a sense of humour. And we actually got the impression that the two most powerful leaders in the Western world might actually be getting on to do something positive together.
They left together momentarily hand in hand. It is the beginning of a relationship. Whether it's special or not, nobody yet knows. Duncan Golostani, News at 10.
Well, fresh from that visit to Washington, tomorrow Theresa May is heading to Turkey for a meeting with President Erdogan, while Donald Trump will have his first phone conversation with President Putin and Chancellor Merkel. And there are testers go head-to-head. And then on Sunday, it's Federer against Nadal, two heavyweight battles between four greats of the game who, between them, have won a remarkable 60 Grand Slam titles. Enjoy the tennis and enjoy the weekend. Julie's here on Monday from me. Bye-bye.